Hey guys! Tonight, we wander through a world that smells faintly of smoke, herbs, and ambition, where flasks bubble over flickering candlelight and the air shivers with the faint tang of metals that may or may not turn to gold. You probably won't survive this without tripping over some obscure Latin phrase or knocking over a jar of powdered mercury, but somehow that makes it all the more thrilling. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You trudge past the creaking oak shelves, heavy with manuscripts whose spines seem to whisper secrets in a tongue you almost understand. Each vellum sheet carries the weight of centuries, ink diagrams of mystical symbols you could squint at for hours and still not decipher. Historians still argue whether the cryptic signs were actual coded recipes for the Philosopher's Stone or elaborate attempts at impressing wealthy patrons, who, honestly, might have been more interested in the drama than the science. A faint glow flickers from a hearth, illuminating the ash-dusted tables where alchemists once worked, their lab coats more like patched robes than anything remotely professional by modern standards. You bend down, carefully avoiding a spilled jar of cinnabar that shimmers with a dangerous red glow, and wonder about the real-life smell. A mix of burning wood, vinegar, sulfur, and maybe a hint of disappointment. French alchemical lore suggests some masters believed in capturing the essence of the sun itself in a flask. The thought makes you grin, imagining a miniature golden sun rolling across the floor. Probably impossible, yet that's exactly the sort of dream that drove centuries of obsession. A low hum of quiet conversation, or is it chanting, seems to rise from the shadows. You notice sketches of mythical creatures tucked between chemical diagrams, dragons coiled around crucibles, phoenixes perched on alembics, and the occasional absurdity of a powdered unicorn horn listed alongside lead filings. Historians still debate whether these were tongue-in-cheek additions, warnings, or sincere beliefs. You lean closer, almost expecting one of the pages to flutter and scold you for prying. As you settle near a workbench cluttered with glassware, you spot a faint trail of gold dust. Likely nothing, probably a trick of candlelight, but for a heartbeat, your imagination runs wild. The alchemists you are shadowing were ordinary humans with extraordinary dreams. Their labs were part science, part theater, and entirely a stage for hope. And you can't help but feel that, centuries later, you're part of the same play. Peering into the flickering shadows, hoping for a glimmer of something eternal and impossible. You step deeper into the labyrinth of manuscripts and shadowed corners, the smell of old parchment mingling with the metallic tang of forgotten experiments. Some pages are so delicate they flake beneath your fingertips, like the dust of time itself settling into your lungs. You trace your fingers over diagrams of interlocking circles, triangles, and squiggly lines that seem to pulse with meaning, if only you knew the secret. French accounts claim these symbols could summon hidden energies, or at least summon the occasional confused apprentice into a broom closet. Historians still argue whether these markings were functional recipes, meditative guides, or just an elaborate way to make one's lab notebook look impressive to patrons. A candle flickers and casts monstrous shadows across the walls, each contorting into something alive, sometimes a dragon coiled on a bookshelf, other times a human face staring back at you, eyebrows raised in eternal judgment. You probably wouldn't survive a night alone in here without tripping over a mortar and pestle, which seem to sprout randomly from the floor like gnarled roots. As you wander, your eyes catch a sequence of symbols that are supposed to describe the Philosopher's Stone. Of course, no one alive or dead has ever definitively created it. Yet the idea pulses through the room, tangible and seductive, like the smell of freshly baked bread that's actually made of lead. You shuffle toward a table cluttered with strange powders, some glittering faintly, some dark as night. One jar, labeled Ashes of the Dragon, smells faintly of burnt caramel, and you can't help but wonder whether the alchemist who labeled it laughed at their whimsy. A small hand-scribbled note tucked beneath the jar claims that when combined with mercurial tears, it can turn any base metal to gold. Quirky as it sounds, you imagine medieval enthusiasts actually following such instructions, earning themselves mild chemical burns and a story to tell. Historians still debate whether these whimsical ingredients were serious attempts at transmutation or coded references to more mundane chemical processes. Your gaze drifts to a shelf stacked with leather-bound tomes whose spines have faded to dusty sepia. Among them, you notice diagrams of stars and planets interwoven with alchemical vessels, suggesting that experimentation was as much about cosmic alignment as chemistry. Alchemists believe celestial influence could accelerate or hinder reactions, which sounds utterly ridiculous until you realize that humans often need a ritual to justify hope. You hum quietly, almost in agreement with their subtle logic. Even if it didn't work, the ritual itself gave purpose to long, cold nights. And then there's the air itself, heavy with the unspoken energy of obsession. You step carefully over a spilled vial of mercury, catching the brief reflection of candlelight and imagining the ghost of an alchemist peering back at you, muttering, "Patience, patience, gold is near." You can almost hear the echo of countless whispered secrets, the rustle of paper, the quiet hissing of distillation, and the faint, almost imperceptible sigh of failure woven into every corner. It is as if the very room is alive with hope, disappointment, and the obsessive heartbeat of centuries-old ambition. You trudge past the cluttered tables, each a chaotic mosaic of flasks, powders, and half-baked experiments. The scent of vinegar and sulfur clings stubbornly to the air, wrapping around your senses like a foggy medieval perfume. A jar of powdered antimony glims under the candlelight, almost beckoning you to touch it. But you resist, remembering tales of apprentices who sneezed for a week after a careless sniff. Fringe lore insists that some powders contained captured spirits, invisible but essential to successful transmutation. Historians still argue whether these fantastical claims were metaphors for chemical reactions or the genuine belief of sleep-deprived minds obsessed with gold. You bend over a bubbling flask, steam curling like a lazy cat along the table, and wonder what the alchemist who left it here was attempting. The liquid inside glows an eerie green under the flickering light. It is probably nothing more than a simple mixture of copper salts and vinegar, but in your imagination, it simmers with the promise of turning lead into gold, or at least into a spectacularly useless green sludge. You catch a glint of something strange, a tiny crystal, jagged and golden brown, sitting precariously at the flask's edge. Maybe it's pyrite, fool's gold, or maybe it's a reminder that even failure can shine. The room is scattered with tools that look alien to modern eyes. Alembics with long, curling necks, athanors designed to maintain precise heat, and crucibles blackened with centuries of trial and error. Some are elegant, some laughably rudimentary, yet each carries a whisper of purpose. Historians still debate whether the complexity of these tools was genuinely necessary or mostly a display of an alchemist's cleverness to impress a wealthy patron. You can almost hear the chuckle of one such patron, tapping their fingers impatiently, wondering when their investment will finally turn into a tangible pile of glittering coins. On a side shelf, you notice tiny vials labeled in ornate handwriting: Elixir of Longevity, Mercury's Secret, Liquid Sunlight. The names alone invite you to imagine life extended for decades, perhaps even centuries, just by imbibing a teaspoon. Quirky accounts suggest that some alchemists believed simply carrying these vials in their pocket could shift luck in their favor. You shake your head and smile, and imagine medieval mornings, an apprentice scurrying around, accidentally spilling liquid sunlight on their robes while their master mutters about cosmic interference. You pause by a small heap of powders, strangely fragrant and oddly colorful, and realize this was a laboratory in constant motion, an orchestra of hope, chemistry, and occasional disaster. The clatter of dropped tools, the hiss of heating liquids, and the quiet muttering over complex formulas create a rhythm you can almost follow.
You might be alone in the room now, but the echoes of centuries of experimentation swirl around you, reminding you that the pursuit of gold was never purely about wealth. It was obsession, performance, and in the end, a strangely beautiful human attempt to grasp the impossible.
You shuffle closer to a dusty corner where portraits hang, faintly illuminated by candlelight, each depicting a face lined with obsession, curiosity, and maybe just a hint of madness. Among them are the legendary alchemists whose names have survived the centuries: Paracelsus, Hermes Trismegistus, Geber. You imagine brushing shoulders with these figures, their eccentricities practically radiating off the parchment. One seems to glare at you, as if to say, "You'll never understand the subtlety of gold from lead," while another smirks knowingly, holding a vial of something that smells vaguely of burnt almonds. Historians still argue whether their fame rests on genuine experimentation or the mythologizing of later writers hungry for drama. You notice their eccentricities woven into marginalia. One annotates with tiny drawings of frogs wearing crowns, another scribbles recipes in invisible ink, and yet another documents experiments with an obsessive precision bordering on compulsive. Fringe tales suggest some alchemists maintained secret gardens where every plant corresponded to a celestial body, used in their mystical transmutations. You shake your head and chuckle, albeit quietly, lest the ghosts of long-dead alchemists think you disrespectful, because some of these rituals seem almost charmingly absurd. A faint breeze brushes past, carrying with it the faint scent of herbs, possibly sage or thyme used to purify the room. You step carefully over a scattered pile of old notebooks, each filled with dense script, diagrams, and tiny doodles of dragons and phoenixes. You wonder if anyone ever read these carefully enough to replicate an experiment, or if the documents were designed to intimidate rivals and patrons alike. Historians still debate whether these intricate diagrams were coded scientific instructions or elaborate theatrical props to impress a wealthy benefactor. You reach a table where a few of these alchemists have apparently left their last experiments unfinished. A blackened alembic sits beside a tiny pile of unreacted metals, and the air is thick with the aroma of burnt salts and herbs. You can almost hear the muttering as the master alchemist paces impatiently, calculating celestial alignments while the apprentice nervously hovers nearby. The line between serious experimentation and performance is hazy. Quirky anecdotes suggest some alchemists would invite unsuspecting visitors to witness an experiment, only to theatrically produce a minor explosion for dramatic effect. Leaning closer, you notice small sketches in the margins of one manuscript, depicting a philosopher's stone shaped like a tiny cube of light. You can almost see it spinning, hovering just out of reach, a tantalizing dream centuries of alchemists chased without ever attaining. It's this mix of brilliance, eccentricity, and unyielding obsession that marks the legendary figures. You can feel their presence, like echoes vibrating through the very walls of the lab. And somehow, amid the smoke, herbs, and flickering candlelight, you realize that their failure, strange as it was, laid down threads that would later weave into modern chemistry, medicine, and the curious, unending human quest to turn the impossible into the tangible. You step cautiously across the creaking floorboards, the faint aroma of burning herbs still lingering, and feel the weight of history pressing softly on your shoulders. Nobles and wealthy patrons often funded these alchemists, lured by promises of unimaginable wealth, and you can almost hear their impatient whispers behind the flickering candlelight. "Surely my gold must be near." You imagine the tension in these labs, master and apprentice working long hours, the pressure of expectation mingling with genuine curiosity. Fringe accounts claim some patrons insisted on witnessing experiments personally, occasionally leading to accidental fires or inexplicable spills. Historians still argue whether these pressures fueled ingenuity or simply magnified eccentricity into obsession. On a workbench near the window, you notice a scattered pile of journals filled with meticulously recorded failures. One entry details a reaction gone awry, producing a black, smoky residue instead of glimmering gold. You grin, thinking, sounds like every baking disaster ever, though in this case the consequences were slightly more hazardous. The patrons, eager for results, sometimes funded a dozen projects at once, juggling optimism with skepticism. You step over a tipped-over vial of mercury, shimmering like liquid silver in the candlelight, and imagine a nervous apprentice silently muttering apologies while trying to hide the evidence. The obsessive routines are almost ritualistic,
stirring a crucible clockwise 3 times, aligning a flask with a specific star, or whispering incantations over a jar of powdered antimony. Quirky accounts suggest some alchemists believe that talking to the materials coaxed them into compliance, as if metals could be reasoned with or flattered. You shake your head, smiling softly. Even the most serious experimentation seems to have a sprinkling of theatrical absurdity. Historians still debate whether these eccentric behaviors were genuinely mystical, cleverly symbolic, or simply ways to maintain focus during long, tedious experiments. A small bell tinkles faintly in the background, signaling the arrival of another patron, perhaps curious, perhaps impatient. You imagine the exchange, a request for the impossible, a flurry of chemical jargon, and the subtle art of managing hope. The alchemist, sweating slightly in the stifling room, explains the delicate balance of elements, careful not to shatter the patron's illusions too quickly. It's a performance in patience, knowledge, and subtle deception, a dance that historians still debate in terms of ethics versus necessity. As you trudge toward a bench with scattered powders and half-filled vials, you notice faint fingerprints in the dust, remnants of someone's frantic experimentation. The line between genuine pursuit and showmanship blurs. And yet, somehow, in the tension between noble expectations and obsessive curiosity, these labs became a crucible not just for experiments, but for ideas, methods, and discoveries that would echo long after the last patron turned away, shaking their head at the elusive promise of gold. You inhale the mingled scents of metal, herbs, and candle wax, and realize you are witnessing the heartbeat of obsession itself, pulsing softly beneath layers of soot and centuries of whispered ambition. You wander over to a table cluttered with tools that seem half scientific, half magical. Alembics with twisting glass necks reflect the candlelight in rainbow arcs, while blackened crucibles sit beside ash-stained stirring rods. Each item seems to hum with purpose, though exactly what that purpose is remains tantalizingly vague. Fringe sources claim some of these contraptions were used to capture the spirits of metals or to distill the sun's essence, which makes you raise an eyebrow and mutter, "Sure, why not?" Historians still debate whether the complexity of these tools was genuinely necessary for chemical reactions or largely performative, meant to impress a wealthy benefactor. You lift a delicate glass tube, noting the fine residue inside, probably left over from decades of experimentation. Tiny notches etched into its sides suggest careful measurement, yet the rest of the lab appears chaotic, a storm of powders, flasks, and papers. Somewhere under the clutter a faint sparkle catches your eye, a remnant of pyrite, fool's gold, reflecting the flickering candlelight. You can't help but smile at the irony. Centuries of meticulous work, yet often it was a glittering illusion that sparked hope rather than actual gold. On a nearby shelf, you notice a collection of small, mysterious vials labeled with cryptic symbols. One is marked with a sun inside a triangle, another with a crescent moon entwined in spirals. Quirky accounts suggest that each vial contains celestial essence, meant to guide reactions at precise times of day or night. You trace a finger along a diagram of an athanor, an alchemical furnace designed for extremely steady heat, and imagine an apprentice pacing back and forth for hours, adjusting the fire, muttering about planetary alignments. Historians still argue whether these astronomical considerations had any measurable effect, or were purely symbolic rituals to maintain patience during tedious processes. You lean closer to a strange contraption that looks like a mix of clockwork and chemistry. Tiny wheels turn when you nudge a lever, moving little glass spheres along channels that intersect with shallow pans of colored powders. It seems absurdly intricate for what might be a simple reaction, yet there's genius hidden in its design. Some of these devices were early attempts at controlled distillation, precise enough to refine metals, acids, or tinctures. You hum softly at the ingenuity and theatricality combined, something both pragmatic and eccentric. The air is thick with curiosity, the faint clink of glass under your fingers punctuating your thoughts. You step back and glance around, noticing the juxtaposition, rudimentary tools beside meticulous contraptions, whimsical sketches beside precise calculations. Each object tells a story of obsession, experimentation, and the pursuit of a dream that always eludes. And as you breathe in the mingled scents of metal, herbs, and lingering candle wax, you sense that this clutter, this chaos, is not a failure. It is a living testament to human imagination, resilience, and the endlessly curious heart of those who chase gold that never came. You glance upward at a constellation chart pinned to the wall, its stars connected by delicate lines like a cosmic spiderweb. Alchemists believe that metals, powders, and even the success of a transmutation were influenced by celestial movements. Mercury's rise, Venus's descent, the waxing moon, all mattered when mixing substances that might someday, maybe, miraculously, turn into gold. Fringe tales claim that some masters refused to start an experiment unless the planets were just right, and you can't help but imagine a nervous apprentice checking a sundial every few minutes. Historians still debate whether these alignments were superstition, psychological tools for focus, or early attempts at understanding environmental variables affecting reactions. You trudge closer to a small table stacked with astrological charts, hand-drawn with a precision that borders on obsessive. Each symbol, circle, triangle, crescent, star, is carefully annotated with notes like "add tincture at Jupiter's ascent" or "stir thrice before moonrise." You can practically hear the whispering of long-dead alchemists: patience, alignment, harmony. The air smells faintly of ink, dust, and something coppery, as if the charts themselves have absorbed centuries of energy and hope. You imagine the quiet, ritualized cadence of these experiments, measuring, stirring, aligning, muttering, awaiting for the heavens to approve. Near the window, a small telescope points outward. You peer through the lens, imagining how an alchemist would chart the stars while cross-referencing diagrams of metals. Quirky accounts suggest some tried to predict the success of an experiment based on the exact location of Mars, or believed a comet passing overhead could alter the reaction's outcome. You shake your head, smiling, picturing medieval labs filled with candlelight, copper smells, and cosmic anxiety. Historians still argue whether astrology had any genuine effect on chemical success, or if it was a structured excuse to slow down the obsessive pace of experimentation. A faint wind rustles loose papers, sending diagrams tumbling like tiny paper meteor showers across the table. One sketch shows a flask beneath a crescent moon, annotated with a precise stirring schedule and temperature notes. You can practically hear the whispering of long-dead alchemists: patience, alignment, harmony. The air smells faintly of ink, dust, and something coppery, as if the charts themselves have absorbed centuries of energy and hope. You imagine the quiet, ritualized cadence of these experiments, measuring, stirring, aligning, muttering, awaiting for the heavens to approve. You step cautiously toward a cluttered side table, where jars, powders, and flasks create a rainbow of strange, glittering substances. One jar contains a deep crimson powder labeled dragon's blood, which smells faintly metallic and oddly sweet at the same time. French tales insist this substance could strengthen metals, heal wounds, or even imbue mystical properties, though your modern sensibilities whisper, probably none of that. Historians still debate whether such ingredients were serious attempts at transmutation, symbolic gestures, or theatrical props meant to impress patrons who were more enchanted by stories than science. Your fingers hover over a tiny vial labeled powdered unicorn horn, and you can't help but smirk. Quirky accounts suggest that carrying a pinch in your pocket could bring luck or enhance experimental success. You shake your head and imagine apprentices trying not to sneeze as they ground mythical substances into flasks, hoping that a little pixie dust, or something resembling it, would turn base metals into gold. Even the most absurd experiments carry traces of human desire, hope so thick you could almost scoop it up with a spoon. A small cauldron bubbles nearby, emitting a thin, blue-tinged smoke that curls lazily toward the rafters. You notice faint fingerprints in the residue, a remnant of countless nights spent measuring, stirring, and adjusting with obsessive care. The meticulous annotations in scattered notebooks describe quantities, temperatures, planetary alignments, and even the emotional state of the experimenter. Historians still argue whether these personal notes were genuinely practical or an attempt to infuse magic into mundane chemistry. You peer at a page showing a transmutation diagram. Arrows, circles, and cryptic symbols intertwine with little sketches of mystical beasts. There's something almost whimsical about the combination of precision and imagination, the blending of science and theater. You picture an apprentice quietly giggling as they grind powdered substances under candlelight, their cat weaving between flasks, knocking over a tiny vial that fizzes spectacularly. Perhaps it was chaos that added charm to these labs, a subtle reminder that magic and miscalculation often go hand in hand. Leaning closer, you notice faint traces of metallic dust on a table corner, remnants of experiments long abandoned. Gold never came, not really, and yet each failure leaves evidence of ambition, curiosity, and innovation. You inhale the mingling scents of herbs, metals, and smoke, and realize that these oddities, powders, magical ingredients, and bizarre experiments aren't merely failures. They are echoes of imagination, perseverance, and a uniquely human obsession with the impossible, lingering in the shadows and inviting you to wonder, just as the alchemists once did. You trudge past a shelf lined with half-used powders and dusty notebooks. Each failure, each experiment gone awry, is layered like sediment, a testament to centuries of human curiosity and occasional hubris. One notebook details a reaction that produced a pungent black sludge instead of gold, yet in the scribbled margins, an observation about the behavior of metals under heat hints at discoveries centuries ahead of their time. Historians still debate whether the true legacy of these failures lies in accidental insights that advance chemistry or in the stubborn pursuit of folly. You pause near a scattered heap of ash and metallic residue, imagining the sound of the alembic hissing, the soft crackle of embers, and the quiet muttering of an exhausted apprentice. Quirky anecdotes suggest some alchemists cataloged failures meticulously, keeping them like trophies to learn, laugh, or simply remember the nightmarish patience required. You imagine one master sighing at the ceiling, muttering, "Well, at least it's not on fire, yet," as another spills yet another vial of mercury, shimmering dangerously on the wooden floor. A faint sparkle of pyrite catches your eye, fool's gold, glinting mockingly under the flickering candlelight. You can almost hear centuries of disappointed sighs, the hum of hope clashing with reality, the repeated lesson that gold does not simply appear from lead. Yet amid this trail of failures, surprising successes emerged. Medicinal tinctures, early chemical acids, and metallurgical insights were born inadvertently from these fruitless quests. Historians still argue whether alchemists anticipated these innovations or stumbled upon them entirely by accident. Near the hearth, a page with smudged ink shows a diagram of a furnace experiment gone wrong, producing an unexpected yet fascinating crystalline formation. You lean closer, inhaling the faint scent of burnt salts and herbs. The scene evokes a strange kind of poetry, human perseverance pushing through smoke, confusion, and repeated disappointment. You chuckle softly, imagining an apprentice whispering to themselves, "One day, gold, or at least the clean experiment," and realize that failure itself is strangely beautiful in its persistence. As you trudge toward a shelf of half-used powders and dusty notebooks, you sense a pattern emerging. Mistakes meticulously noted, experiments repeated, whimsical ingredients included alongside serious chemicals. This chaotic tapestry of error and creativity reminds you that alchemy, despite its failures, shaped the foundations of modern science. The pursuit of gold, though fruitless, created knowledge, patience, and curiosity that ripple through centuries. You inhale the faint scent of herbs, ashes, and metal, and feel the heartbeat of centuries of human endeavor, a rhythm of hope that never truly dies.
You slip deeper into the dim corners of the lab, where secrecy seems almost tangible, like a soft cloak wrapped around stacks of manuscripts in shadowed glassware.
Many alchemists operated within secretive societies, their knowledge protected by cryptic codes, encrypted texts, and even cryptograms etched into the margins of manuscripts. Fringe tales suggest some brotherhoods went so far as to create fake experiments solely to confuse outsiders or rival alchemists. Historians still debate whether these secretive practices were genuinely protective of scientific knowledge or simply designed to inflate prestige and mystique. A small locked cabinet catches your eye. You imagine the whispered conversations behind it, masters conferring over delicate powders, apprentices tiptoeing to avoid the wrong glance, and cryptic symbols exchanged in coded gestures. You picture clandestine meetings illuminated by candlelight, the air thick with herbs, smoke, and hushed anticipation. Quirky anecdotes claim that some societies used handshakes, subtle gestures, or even secret knocks to gain entry into their inner circles. Tiny rituals that added layers of drama and exclusivity to the pursuit of transmutation. You step carefully over scattered papers, noting diagrams annotated in invisible ink, instructions for experiments that could not be completed publicly, and notes on mystical correspondences. Some texts describe exercises in moral refinement, suggesting that alchemy was as much about cultivating virtue as producing gold. Historians still argue whether this spiritual component was genuine philosophy or an elegant way to disguise chemical experiments from the uninitiated. A faint glimmer of gold dust peeks from a partially open chest, though it is likely just remnants from past failures, hinting at a promise that never fully materialized. You imagine an apprentice nervously counting the dust, holding their breath in hope, while the master hovers behind them with a knowing expression. Patience, observation, and discretion were often more valuable than the fleeting shimmer of success. The room seems alive with whispers of secret knowledge, rustling papers, the soft clink of flasks, and distant echoes of failed experiments. You trace your fingers along a manuscript filled with encrypted symbols, imagining centuries of cautious hands passing it from one alchemist to another. The allure of hidden societies wasn't just power, it was intimacy with knowledge, a shared obsession that bound individuals across time. You inhale the mingling scents of ink, herbs, and faint metal, realizing that the dance of secrecy and curiosity was as integral to alchemy as the gold it promised, shaping generations of minds long after the workbenches fell silent. You wander past the faint scent of burning herbs and the metallic tang lingering in the air, noticing evidence of alchemy's influence beyond the lab. Paintings on the walls depict whimsical dragons curled around flasks, while literature from the era brims with references to mystical metals, magical transformations, and secret knowledge. Quirky anecdotes claim that playwrights and poets sometimes attended experiments, scribbling inspired lines while flasks hissed and powders glittered. Historians still argue whether alchemy's presence in culture reflects genuine admiration for scientific endeavor or a fascination with the theater of the impossible.
You move toward a corner where a pile of half-burned manuscripts lies, pages curling and brittle with age. The room smells faintly of scorched paper and powdered metals, a heady mixture that seems to carry the weight of centuries of obsessive experimentation. Fringe accounts whisper that some alchemists kept failed gold as talismans, tiny flecks that reminded them of ambition's stubborn grip. Historians still argue whether these small treasures were superstition, obsessive collection, or symbolic victories over repeated failure. You kneel beside a scattered heap of powders, their colors ranging from deep reds to pale yellows. One jar is labeled Essence of Sun, another Moon's Tears. Quirky legends suggest that these substances could shift luck, enhance clarity, or align the experimenter with cosmic forces. You chuckle softly, imagining medieval apprentices carefully measuring Moon's tears while hoping the planets smiled upon their work. Each vial, whether mundane or mystical, represents centuries of hope distilled into tangible, glittering powder. A nearby workbench holds glass tubes, delicate flasks, and a tiny alembic that has blackened with age. You notice smudged fingerprints on the glass, a ghostly testament to countless nights of stirring, heating, and waiting. Some vials contain residues that might have led to accidental discoveries in medicine or metallurgy, even if gold remained elusive. Historians still debate whether these accidental insights were intentional experimentation or merely the byproduct of obsession. You lean closer to a handwritten journal, its pages filled with diagrams that interlace alchemical symbols with sketches of stars and mystical creatures. Dragons curl around crucibles, phoenixes hover over flames, and tiny human figures appear to peer curiously into flasks. Quirky stories claim that these drawings were coded warnings, playful commentary, or meditative doodles designed to inspire focus. You trace the ink with your finger, feeling the pulse of imagination that runs beneath the methodical notes. A faint wind drifts through a cracked window, stirring loose papers and carrying a whisper of herbs, soot, and candle wax. You inhale slowly, absorbing the atmosphere of persistent hope, failure, and imagination. Gold never appeared, yet every spill, every smudge, every miscalculation contributed to knowledge, culture, and the curious art of thinking beyond the ordinary. In these quiet, dusty corners, obsession becomes poetry, frustration transforms into method, and the heartbeat of centuries-old curiosity pulses softly, inviting you to linger just a little longer. You step toward a small wooden cabinet tucked in the corner, its doors slightly ajar, revealing rows of tiny bottles filled with powders, tinctures, and mysterious liquids. The faint metallic scent mixes with the lingering aroma of herbs and smoke, creating a sensory echo of countless nights of experimentation. Fringe accounts claim some alchemists believed these bottles contained the essence of planets themselves, or even trapped elemental spirits that could be coaxed into aiding transmutation. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were mystical, symbolic, or simply a colorful way to describe chemical phenomena. Your fingers brush against a flask labeled Mercurial Heart, its contents a silvery shimmer that dances under the flickering candlelight. Quirky legends suggest that handling this substance required ritualized gestures, murmured incantations, and extreme patience, or risk unpredictable results. You picture an apprentice pacing nervously around a flickering flame, carefully monitoring a slow reaction, heart racing with hope and anxiety. Each step, each stir, each careful addition of powder feels like a delicate negotiation between knowledge, superstition, and ambition. A faint clatter catches your attention, and you glance toward a workbench strewn with diagrams, notes, and sketches. One page depicts a complex furnace system designed for precise heating over many hours, while another shows an elaborate planetary alignment chart meant to guide the timing of reactions. Historians still argue whether these astronomical integrations genuinely affected chemical outcomes, or whether they were clever psychological tools to maintain focus during long, tedious nights. You imagine the rhythmic pacing, careful stirring, and whispered mutterings that accompanied these rituals. Near the hearth, a tiny pile of glimmering dust, a remnant of countless failed transmutations, catches your eye.
You reach down, brushing a finger through the glittering remnants, and marvel at the devotion that kept generations of alchemists awake long past midnight. Quirky tales suggest some would obsessively count each speck, interpreting its presence as a sign from the cosmos or as encouragement to continue. You smile softly, imagining centuries of hope distilled into these minute, glittering particles. The room feels alive with echoes of aspiration, failure, and unyielding curiosity. Gold may have never appeared, yet the alchemists' methods, rituals, and relentless experimentation left indelible marks on manuscripts, on tools, on culture, and on the history of science itself. You inhale the mingling scents of metal, smoke, and herbs one last time before stepping back, realizing that the lab's true legacy is not gold, but human imagination, the unshakable, shimmering pulse of curiosity that refuses to die, even in the face of impossibility. You trudge slowly toward the farthest corner of the laboratory, where the shadows deepen and the air seems thicker with centuries of hope and obsession. Piles of notebooks, glass vials, and blackened crucibles form a chaotic mosaic, each a testament to relentless experimentation. Fringe stories claim that some alchemists left secret messages hidden in these piles, coded instructions for future generations, or perhaps just cryptic riddles to amuse themselves. Historians still debate whether these were genuine guides, playful distractions, or a mix of both, reflecting the enigmatic character of alchemical pursuit. A faint glimmer of gold-colored dust catches your eye, lying on top of an old, cracked notebook. You reach down, brushing it gently between your fingers, and realize it's probably pyrite, fool's gold, but for centuries it was hope embodied, a small, sparkling reward that never truly fulfilled its promise. Quirky anecdotes suggest apprentices would pocket flecks of it, believing it might secretly catalyze success in future experiments. You imagine hands, trembling with anticipation, carefully measuring powders, adjusting flames, and muttering incantations. Human persistence distilled into obsessive ritual. You glance around the room at scattered diagrams, planetary charts, and mystical symbols etched into paper margins. Each piece of work is simultaneously meticulous and fantastical, revealing a blending of careful observation and imagination that defines alchemy itself. Historians still argue whether these symbolic overlays were purely metaphorical or intended as practical guides for experiments. The lines between science, mysticism, and performance blur, creating an atmosphere both enchanting and strangely intimate. Near the hearth, a faint blue smoke drifts from a tiny alembic, curling into the darkness like a lazy serpent. You inhale deeply, sensing the residue of centuries of human striving, late nights, meticulous stirring, whispered hope, and quiet despair. The alchemists' obsession with gold, though futile in material terms, yielded far more than precious metal. It produced methods, ideas, and inspiration that ripple through history, influencing chemistry, medicine, and the cultural imagination. As you linger among the remnants of centuries, the heartbeat of the lab feels palpable, a rhythm of hope, failure, and unyielding curiosity. Gold never arrived, yet the work itself shines brighter than any metal could. You exhale slowly, letting the scents of metal, herbs, and candle wax mingle with your thoughts. Here in this dusty, flickering room, the dreamers of old whisper across time, their obsession a gentle echo reminding you that sometimes the pursuit itself is the greatest treasure. The flickering candlelight softens, and the shadows on the walls grow long and gentle. You settle into the quiet rhythm of the room, allowing your breathing to match the slow, patient pulse of centuries of quiet ambition. The scattered powders, glass vials, and blackened crucibles no longer feel cluttered or chaotic. Instead, they become companions, witnesses to human curiosity and determination. Outside, the night drapes itself over the world like a velvet blanket, the faint chirping of crickets mingling with your thoughts. You can imagine the alchemists of old, pausing in their work, leaning against worn tables, staring into the flickering flames with a mixture of hope and resignation.
their obsession transformed into quiet, meditative persistence. You inhale the mingling scents of metal, herbs, and faint smoke, letting them anchor you in this timeless space. The glitter of pyrite, the whimsical sketches of dragons and phoenixes, the carefully annotated notes, all of it becomes a lullaby of human ingenuity, a gentle reminder that even in failure there is beauty, learning, and poetry. You may never hold gold in your hands, but the echoes of curiosity and imagination left behind shimmer more brightly than any metal ever could. Your mind begins to drift, carried by the rhythm of the lab's legacy. Imagine the quiet footsteps of apprentices, the soft murmur of formulas whispered in the dark, the faint clink of glass, the dancing candle flames casting playful shadows across centuries-old manuscripts.